over the next 2 lessons. And here is the drug. In fact, it's not just a drug, it's a cocktail. It's a cocktail of drugs because they seem to work best in many situations. So here is the cocktail. I hope you're listening now because this is very important. The wonder drug. 30 minutes of physical exercise 4 times a week. The second component of the cocktail. At least 15 minutes of mindfulness exercise 6 or 7 times a week. The third component of this cocktail, with all these benefits. 8 hours of sleep, more or less, per 24 hours. And the final component of the cocktail, 12 hugs a day. The last one, you can overdose on. Or rather, you can't you can have as much as you like. But at least 12 hugs a day. If you take this drug, you may hug, that's fine. This is 1504, come on. But no sleeping in class. If you take this drug, this cocktail, I guarantee many of the benefits, if not all of the benefits, and possibly many more benefits that I've just talked about before. You see, only today, we're beginning to understand the connection between mind and body. One of the first people to really understand it, who we'll talk about in the next 2 classes, is Jon Kabat-Zinn, in his wonderful book, Full Catastrophe Living, a phrase taken from Zorba the Greek. Jon Kabat-Zinn, perhaps the most fundamental development in behavioral medicine is the recognition that we can no longer think about health as being solely a characteristic of the body or the mind, because body and mind are interconnected. This is essentially a rejection of hundreds of years of Western thinking. Cartesian dualism, René Descartes, the mind and the body are 2 irreconcilable separate entities. And this permeated medicine. How do we fix a person? Like we fix a machine, we fix the body. The mind is something entirely separate from it. And again, Descartes didn't invent it. We can see seeds of Cartesian dualism in the works of Plato, which then Aristotle tried to negate, recreating the mind-body connection. But again, was made very clear, very evident in the West with Descartes in the 17th century. And comes along Jon Kabat-Zinn, comes along Herbert Benson, come along Alan Langer, comes along Tara Bennett Goldman. Psychologists, doctors who understand the connection. Comes along John Sarno, a medical doctor from NYU, New York University Medical School, and shows how with our thinking we can overcome most of our back problems or carpal tunnel syndrome, showing the connection between mind and body. Or the placebo effect, staggering effects. Remember, we talked about it with reversing the effect of ipecac, and asking how can we use the mind and the body to help each other to launch a virtuous cycle between the two, where mind helps body and body helps mind. I want to begin by talking about physical exercise, the first component of that cocktail, the first component of the wonder drug. What's happening today? Today, there is reduction of physical work. More and more people today have the quote-unquote luxury of not having to physically work hard. And I put it in quotes because it is one of the manifestations of the underprivilege of privilege. You see, in the past, we had to run after a deer for lunch or run away from a lion so that we don't become lunch. We had to gather berries for dessert. What do we do today? Go to the dessert table in our house or call up for pizza. In the past, we had to gather logs if we wanted to keep warm. Today, what do? This exercise. Turn up the thermometer. And we pay a price. But you know, when I was growing up in Israel, I remember, Israel is a Mediterranean country. 2 to 4 p.m. is siesta time. Very quiet. Kids are not out on the street. But at 4:00, sometimes even at 3:59, every day there was a shout from the street calling Tal, soccer, and then calling the other kids soccer or hide and seek or running around. That's what we did from 4 p.m. after siesta time until night when we went to sleep and Mom called us to have dinner. What happens today in Israel, and not just in Israel, around the world at 4 p.m.? It's not going down and playing soccer and running around. It's continuing to be on the computer. It's continuing to watch television. And as a result of that, as a result of the fact that we have become so much more sedentary, we are paying a very high price. Of course, on the physical level, but even more than that, on the psychological level. It is no coincidence the levels of depression have gone up tenfold. It is no coincidence since the 1960s. It is no coincidence that the average age, the onset of depression today is just under 15. Whereas in the 1960s, the average onset of depression was around 30. It is because we have stopped exercising. We have stopped exerting effort, energy. It is no coincidence the levels of ADD and ADHD are skyrocketing. Not to mention, and I will mention later, the physical consequences of a sedentary life. You see, exercise is not a luxury, it's a need. And it's a need just like oxygen is a need, just like certain vitamins are a need, just like protein and carbohydrates are needs. We weren't born to sit in front of a computer all day long or to just talk all day long. Yeah, we were meant to do it at the end of the day after we have hunted and gathered. And whether it's by God or whether it's by evolution or both, we now have a need for physical exercise, and we frustrate a need, whether it's a need for vitamins, whether it's a need for protein, or the need for exercise, we pay a price. Both physical price as well as psychological price. Seneca, over 2,000 years ago, the Greek philosopher, our forefathers lived every jot as well as we when they provided and dressed their own meat with their own hands, lodged upon the ground, and were not as yet come to the vanity of gold and gems. This is Seneca, a very thoughtful philosopher, talking about the lack of physical exercise that existed in his time. How much more is it today? When today we're living, in our age, the way that not even royalty lived just 100 or 200 years ago. The easy life, the luxurious life. And it's the underprivilege of privilege. We're paying the price for it. Let's see what our psychologist has to say about this. Ellen DeGeneres, on the state of affairs.
We're lazy. We have buttons doing everything for it. There's no physical activity attached to anything anymore. Even the garage door opener. We used to have to get out of the car and open up the garage door. Now there's a button you push, And the car window. This became too much. I don't want to churn butter. I just want fresh air. We still use that gesture if we want somebody to roll their window down in traffic. We still use that, even though nobody's got it. Because we'd look like idiots if we did this. We're lazy. Even, we used to have breath mints. Now we have breath strips. They just dissolve on our tongue for us. How lazy. Can we not suck anymore? Put it on. I'm tired. I had a hard day.
Let me share with you a few studies about the effect of this kind of lifestyle. This was done by Michael Babiak and his colleagues at Duke Medical School. This was a very important study that launched after numerous studies that replicated this and showed how this applies, how exercise is important, not just for depression, also for other areas. So what Michael Babiak did was bring in 156 patients with major depression. These are people who have a number of symptoms, among which are insomnia, eating disorders, listlessness, lack of desire to act, depressed mood, many of them suicidal with attempts or thoughts about suicide, and on and on. These are people who are in very bad shape. And he brought them into the lab and randomly divided them into 3 groups. The first group was the exercise group. Second group was put on medication, and the third group was put on medication and exercise. The kind of medication was the antidepressant Zoloft, the second most popular common antidepressant after Prozac. Very powerful, works. A lot of studies compared to placebos showing that Zoloft works. An SSRI. The exercise that they were put on was 30 minutes of moderate difficulty, so aerobic physical exercise. So it could be jogging or brisk walking, it could be swimming. Not too hard, but moderate difficulty of exercise 3 times a week for 30 minutes. And then he followed these 3 groups, exercise group, the medication group, and the exercise and medication group, followed them for 4 months. And here are the results. What he wanted to see is how many of the 156 patients, or 52 per group, how many of them get over their major depression. And what he found was that in each one of the 3 groups, over 60% got better. By the end of the 4 months, they were not experiencing the symptoms associated with major depression anymore, or most of the symptoms at the very least. They were could no longer be categorized by the DSM-4 as having major depression. There was no significant difference among the groups except for one difference. The group that exercised only, it took them a little bit longer to get over their major depression. So with the medication, it usually took probably around between 1 week and 2 weeks, around 10 days to overcome their depression for the 60% who were helped. For the exercise-only group, it took closer to a month. But after the first month, once they got better, there was no difference. All 3 groups benefited as much. Now, very important point. This does not mean that we should do away with antidepressants or anti-anxiety pills or Ritalin for ADD, ADHD. Not at all. What it is